and welcome to the Big Five podcast from Northumbria Psychology Department. My name is Dr. Genevieve Brown, and I'll be your guide into the minds of psychology students, alumni, and researchers at Northumbria University. I'm a lecturer and a researcher in the psychology department. Each week on this podcast, I'll speak to a guest who is either a student, alumni, or researcher in the Northumbria Psychology Department. By asking them 5 big questions, we'll learn about their time studying psychology and hopefully learn some big facts about human behavior and experience. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to my guest, Sarah Docherty. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Genevieve.
Sarah has completed her BSc in psychology and her MRes in psychology at Northumbria and has been here since 2014. She also acted as a research assistant at the Brain Performance Nutrition Research Center. She's currently doing her PhD under the supervision of Crystal Haskell-Ramsey, Mark Weatherall, and Lynn McInnes, and she's looking at multivitamin supplements for older adults. And today, Sarah is going to tell us a bit about her experience being a student at Northumbria and currently studying as a PhD student there. So, Sarah, could you tell us a little bit about why you wanted to study psychology and kind of how you found yourself doing a PhD?
So I think I was kind of one of these people when I first started my degree where I was kind of like, I want to do psychology because it's interesting. So I think a lot of people start the degree like that and maybe not kind of knowing what they're interested in. But throughout my degree, it was research that I was really, really interested in. I loved doing different types of research. And I kind of fell into the area that I enjoyed. So I started helping out as kind of interning throughout my degree at the Brain Performance and Nutrition Center. And I kind of found a love there for kind of nutritional interventions and clinical interventions and kind of the impact they can have on people and kind of the different aspects of psychology that can affect stress and mood and how we can use kind of nutrition and supplementation to help people throughout. And then through that work, I kind of also became interested in the aging population and older adults and how there's kind of a massive area there that we can help through supplementation. And that's kind of what got me interested in my area of just getting the experience. And for me, I enjoy kind of planning out the research and thinking, okay, how will this actually help people? And designing studies that are kind of person-centered. So for these people, what will help them and how can we do that? And that's how I kind of became interested in my specific area. Looking at kind of nutritional deficiencies and seeing how they can be supplemented. And it's things that can be done like really easily in everyday life. So things like supplements are readily available. So looking at whether something like this can improve different kind of psychological outcomes in older adults and how this can kind of help that population. Because we always see the negative connotations of an aging population of kind of economic issues and social issues and healthcare issues, but in fact that population it's not a burden in our society. And I think being able to run research that is actually going to improve these people's quality of life is so important. And that's what I like about psychology, is working with people and kind of getting their input and saying, okay, if we do this, how does that make you feel? Does that make you feel better day to day? And I think it's seeing these kind of daily improvements when you're interacting with your participants and interacting with people is why I enjoy it so much, of kind of seeing the real world benefits of doing the research.
Yeah, that's definitely amazing when we can directly see the influence of our research that it's having on people's lives. As I said at the beginning, you've been studying psychology at Northumbria for a while now. What's that been like, studying from undergraduate all the way through to your PhD now? Have there been any experiences that really marked your studies, any classes that you found really developed your identity as a researcher?
Yeah, so I think even when I think back to kind of my first year of my degree, and we do our lab classes where we learn about research methods, that kind of was where it all began for me, because I was like, some people kind of don't really like that aspect, but I just loved it, and I loved being able to kind of design studies and do it how I would like to do it. So throughout that, I loved doing the labs classes and getting that hands-on experience doing research. And then developing through that, I did kind of lots of different placements, which were kind of my option modules on my degree. And then that kind of sparked it more because I love doing like the practical side of things and research and internship. So I got the chance to work with like different members of staff in the department working on different research projects. And I think for me, that's kind of what pushed us towards a PhD, because I got to see all this research that was going on in the department at the time, and seeing the kind of how well run that was, and the publications that were coming out from the university at the time, and just really wanting to be a part of that. And then moving on to my master's, it was all research based, as it's a master's of research. And within that, a large chunk is your placement and internship within the department. And that's again when I started working at the Brain Performance and Nutrition Research Centre, and just getting that hands-on experience of working on like real clinical trials that were happening. And I love doing that. I love the master's experience here. And I think that's what pushed us towards the PhD, because like I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I thought I can take all the skills I've learned here towards a PhD and use all the transferable skills to help me do the PhD successfully. So all the research skills I got, but also kind of just like the transferable skills of like time management and research management. But yeah, I would say it started on the undergraduate degree on the labs classes, and then as I progressed through, being able to kind of use those initial skills to develop my research skills throughout. And I think there was always a lot of opportunities to get involved in different aspects of research, which I really liked about the degree, because I like the practical elements of it. And I think that's why I kind of enjoyed it so much, and that's what pushed me towards my PhD.
Yeah, that's really a great resume of how you can progress from undergraduate if you really take on board those research methods that we start from the very beginning and use those to really develop your own research projects. What would you say is the most exciting or surprising thing that you learned on the program or that you found in your research? Did you do any very interesting clinical trials, for example, at the Brain Performance and Nutrition Center?
Yeah, so I think when I was working there, it was seeing the industry side of it, of kind of working with the university and how that works. And I think that was really interesting. Um, but I think kind of for me, it was kind of how flexible research can be. So I think we always have these ideas of clinical trials and what they were, and I started my PhD with that. But because of like the ability to kind of plan my own research, managing just to seeing how you can adapt your research all the times. So I was doing my PhD right in the middle of COVID pandemic. So at first it was kind of like, oh, this is kind of ruining all of my research. But then because of that, I completely changed my research plan. But I think if anything, it benefited my PhD so much more. So now when I look at the research I've produced during this time, I think it's a lot more meaningful than what I had originally planned to do. And also I started with the idea of this is what a clinical trial is and this is how it should run. But again, just seeing how flexible the research can be. So I've used quite different methodological approaches, I think, is other than other people have done in clinical trials. So I'm kind of bio-psych, but I started off my PhD with a qualitative study, which is something I'd never done before, just because I wanted to design my clinical trial to be meaningful to the people who would be taking part in it. So I started with a qualitative approach where I asked 200 over 70-year-olds kind of what would you want to improve in your life, or if you could take a supplement, what would you like to see improvements in? And the results were kind of not what I was really expecting. That helped me to design my intervention based on the people who are actually taking part in it. I think is quite a nice approach, because as someone who's in my mid-20s, I can't really say what someone who's over 70 would actually like to see improvements in their life. So I think doing that has just helped me like become a flexible researcher, and I think it's kind of changed my whole outlook to research and how I would do my research. So I think taking the benefits out of kind of the pandemic has been kind of the most thing I was surprised about in my PhD, because when I first started, I kind of had the negative attitude of this has ruined all my research, but in fact, it just made it better, if anything. So I think that was the most surprising thing I found, that you can be very flexible in your research, especially if you've got a supportive team around you. So my supervisors are very supportive of kind of the creative direction I would like to go in. So I think they've let me be so kind of in charge of my research and support the ideas I've had throughout, which has just been great.
Yeah, that supervisor support is so important. And I was gonna ask, actually, I'm curious, what was it the older adults wanted to improve the most? What was so surprising about that?
So I think the main thing that I found, which I kind of wasn't expecting, and that's because I'm just going through my lived experience, is that kind of one of the main things that came out was that there was such a big desire to improve kind of older adults' sexual life and how much importance they put on that. And there's kind of stigma around speaking about that. And even reading through the literature, there's a lot of research that shows even kind of doctors are kind of unwilling to
Mm,
speak to older adults about their sexual life. And there was such a big importance on that of being able to still engage in a satisfactory sex life and how kind of health problems and medication can stop that. And aside from that, there was a lot of just kind of being able to engage in day-to-day activities. So being able to feel physically well enough to do housework and
mm.
being able to go out with friends and family and how the mobility can stop that. So people didn't seem to really complain about the actual health issues that they might have
Hmm.
been experiencing. It was more the knock-on effects that this then had on other areas of their life. So being able to kind of partake in any recreational activities that they would like to do, or the type of activities they could do with their friends and family. And again, just the stuff they could do in the house. And I think that's to do with still being able to enjoy your own life independently. So it's
Mhm.
less the health issues, it's more the side effects of those. Which is something I'd never really thought about myself.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. So, I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about where your PhD has gone from that first study. What other interesting findings have you found? And I guess how close are you to the end? And what do you kind of see as the end goal of this research?
I started out with that qualitative study, and then that helped me design my main intervention. So I then had all the outcome variables that I wanted, which had came from the participants' own views. And then I designed my intervention. And it was a 12-week supplementation study. And I started off getting people in and doing a baseline, giving them the supplements for 12 weeks, and then getting them back in to do it again. But then, of course, the pandemic hit and we couldn't do research anymore. And I had kind of a really unique situation where I had a group of people who had done their baseline measurements during kind of before the pandemic. And then they would do a complete follow up 12 weeks later while we're in lockdown. So I kind of thought, okay, there's something really interesting here. A lot of research that was being published at the time into the COVID pandemic didn't actually have a baseline of the same people who
Mhm.
took part because obviously it was unexpected. So I thought, okay, if we take the intervention away and don't actually think about the supplementation, what can we see from the baseline to follow up of how the pandemic has actually affected older adults? So I designed that and I moved everything online. And then we had a look from pre to during lockdown, what actually happened. And then all my participants have been so great and so interested in the research. So then we actually then contact them a year after when we were coming out of lockdown to kind of track what had
Wow.
happened across the time. And the results were actually very, very interesting. So from pre to during lockdown, there was kind of higher perceived stress, worse well-being, and worse depressive symptoms, which of course seems logical based on what was happening at the time. But there was actually improvements in self-reported physical health symptoms, improvements in relationship quality, and improvements in time spent engaging in physical activity, which kind of seemed counterintuitive. So we're kind of looking at the reasons why this might be. So the things like improved physical activity is what you kind of put down is that people had more time kind of in the house, not having any external responsibilities. So what I've found in my participants is that they live in such fulfilling lives. They've got so many kind of hobbies and activities that they kind of don't stop. But when they were in the house, they had time to engage in more physical
Mm.
activity around the house. And one of the only things that we were actually allowed to leave the house for was to do exercise. So that was one of the explicit reasons we were allowed to leave. In the first lockdown, actually also coincided with kind of one of the hottest springs on record. So this gave time for people to do things, kind of activities in the garden and even gardening. And this all kind of increased how much time they were doing physical activity for. And in terms of the improvements in relationship quality, I think especially during the first lockdown, there was such a kind of big emphasis on community spirit and helping out the neighbours. And we actually saw this because there was an increase in the relationship quality. People kind of on the outskirts of your social network. So maybe not people that you see every day, but kind of neighbours and extended family. And people actually reported that there was an increase in this relationship quality, which I thought was quite interesting. So although there was definitely the bad sides of lockdown, there was also some kind of
Hmm.
improvements. And then when we followed up the year later, it was well-being and depression and mood still negatively affected post-lockdown. So those kind of longer-term effects that hadn't really been addressed. And what was kind of important as well is that all my participants were kind of healthy in terms of established norms at baseline. So people who maybe don't have those healthy norms at baseline, they could have had an even greater impact because of lockdown. So kind of more vulnerable populations were probably more negatively impacted. So when we're seeing the effect in people who have kind of normal levels at baseline, it's probably going to be worse for people who didn't have those normal levels at baseline. So I think that was quite interesting overall.
Yeah, definitely. What an amazing opportunity to do that study just because the timing was right. And
Yeah, it was
that's
a really unique perspective, and I think that was probably the main strength of when I was reading the other research in the area. There was a lot of kind of matched pairs designs in terms of because it wasn't anticipated, so no one had that baseline, and I just had that baseline by chance. And what I thought was going to kind of ruin my research actually then developed into a lot more meaningful research with the data
mm.
that I actually had. Very surprising that it came out that way. But I think I was very lucky in terms of my research during that time compared to maybe some other PhD students.
Well, I think that's a testament to your creative spirit to find a way to turn that into a positive. That's really great. Have you published a paper on that yet, or are you still in the process
Yes,
of writing it?
that
Yeah.
is that is published now. It was published on gerontology and geriatric medicine. That is open access as well to read.
What's the title of that paper?
It is called The Effect of COVID-19 Lockdown on Health and Psychosocial Functioning in Adults aged 70 and over.
Wow, excellent. Well, if any of our listeners are interested in that topic, you can go check out that paper. You have made quite a bit of progress in your research. Sounds like you're nearing the end of your PhD. So, since you have done so well, do you have any advice to provide for any students who are interested in doing a PhD, who are just starting a PhD? What would you say is the biggest thing that the biggest skill you need to develop to be successful?
You need to be resilient. Things aren't going to always go the way that you plan. And what you come in your first few months thinking you're going to do might not be exactly what you end up with. And that's completely fine because everything is dependent on circumstances and what you can do at the time. So you've got to kind of build up that resilience of, okay, this might not be exactly what I had in mind in my first few months of my PhD, but what I can actually do based on what I find can be a lot more interesting. So yeah, being resilient, I would say, would be the most important thing. Um, just being able to organisation skills, I cannot stress enough. So I think when I first started, I wasn't as organised as I was now, and I wish I had been in terms of kind of anything you do, make a note of what you've done because you will forget it. So you'll do something the other day and you'll think, oh, I'll remember exactly what I did here. And then you get started on another project and you don't come back to that until 6 months later. And then you're like, oh, I've got no idea what I actually did with this data. I thought I'd remember, but I didn't. So I think kind of keeping some sort of record of everything that you do, track of kind of our meetings and what we did. So engaging in that so you actually have a record of what you've done each week. And what I think helped the most for me was, I think kind of halfway through, yeah, it's such a weird position where it's like you feel like you're almost towards the end, but also that you haven't really done much. And you probably have. But just keeping your supervisors updated of how you're actually doing and not just saying that you're fine if you're not feeling a bit fine,
Yes.
because everyone loses motivation throughout. So I think just having that relationship with your supervisors in terms of being able to say, okay, this week I haven't actually really done anything. I've maybe just my head's been elsewhere. I've lost track a little bit, and being completely open and honest about that because it does happen to everybody. So then I asked for my supervisors for weekly meetings so I could make myself smaller targets. And that helped a lot. And I think that, again, that's another important thing, is to make yourself small weekly targets, things to do rather than big projects. If you have a kind of a target of write an introduction section, that's really hard to achieve. Whereas if you're like, okay, this week I would just like to write the first 2 paragraphs and kind of what I want to write in that, and kind of having smaller, more manageable targets, because there's such a nice feeling when you do accomplish the small things. So I kind of write myself to-do lists each week with some things that I think will be really quick, but then they turn out to take a lot longer than I expected. But then at least I can still say I've done that, and I maybe haven't done everything else, but I've got kind of my small targets that I want to meet. And I think that's really important, because most of your PhD isn't kind of these massive projects. It's smaller things of, okay, I need to do ethics documents this week, and kind of making kind of smaller targets. I think that's quite an important thing throughout. I think I've just listed about 10 different things, but I think there's a lot to kind of think about. So I think being resilient, being organised, and making sure you're honest with your supervisors throughout would be kind of my main things throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you were saying trying to remember projects, what you've done 6 months later, I was going to say that's the main reason I pre-register my work now, is just so when I go back, I can be like, what were my hypotheses?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. And yeah, the communication with your supervisors obviously is so important, because your supervisors have your best interest at heart, but sometimes we need to know what you need as a supervision style. So if it's weekly meetings, if it's us setting deadlines for you, we're happy to do those things, but of course it requires communication and negotiating that relationship, which is really important. Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fascinating. And I hope that anybody out there who's starting a PhD has found this advice very helpful. So, Sarah, where can people find you online if they'd like to follow your research?
I am on LinkedIn and ResearchGate as Sarah Docherty. I am on Twitter as Sarah_Docherty1. And there is also a Facebook page which myself and another PhD student in the department created, Alexandra Thompson, where we were both doing aging research. So we made a Facebook page which is Healthy Aging Psychology Research at Northumbria University. And this kind of outlines any research that's going on or anything interesting that we've got going on within our research studies. So if anyone's interested, they can like the Facebook page as well.
All right, excellent. And can people in the community who are interested in participating in your research get in touch that way as well?
Yeah, so if they like the page, you can message the page to kind of register your interest in any kind of work or studies we're working on. We will post on there as well for people to get involved in.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. If you would like to learn more about Northumbria psychology, check out our psychology department blog at northumbriapsy.com.
On our blog, you'll also find some opportunities to apply for funded PhD-ships.
You can also follow us on Twitter at NorthumbriaPSY. If you would like to be interviewed on the podcast or know someone who would, please email me at genevieve.brown@northumbria.ac.uk. Finally, if you liked the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your listening app and give us a review and rating.
We'll be taking a short hiatus over winter break, but we'll be back with you on January 10th. And all the month of January, we will have guests speaking about PhD studentship opportunities in Northumbria Psychology Department. I hope you've learned something on this voyage into the mind. Take care. Until next time.